Service, they called it. And the word slid across the tongue like a clean blade, brighter than anything the Forgeworks had allowed. 10 years, 4 months, 17 days measured not in chains or quotas, but in potted ferns, sweating under false sunlight in bowls of broth that actually tasted of salt and bone, in photographs of wide green fields pinned to gray walls with the reverence of relics. Administrator Elena Vasquez arrived with a voice that did not grind like a servo, and hands that did not carry a shock prod. And for the first time in a decade, the corridor smelled less like copper and more like antiseptic and boiled grain. She spoke of service and reintegration of duty, repaid by usefulness of bodies repaired, so they could work again without breaking quite so quickly. And the guards behind her stared from the corners with sensor eyes dimmed, as if uncertain whether kindness counted as contraband. They lengthened our rations by inches, not by mercy but by policy. The tin tray came warm instead of lukewarm, and the broth skimmed with fat that left a sheen on the lips, the bread no longer a brick, but a ragged heel you could pull apart with fingers, and steam rose like prayer. The paste did not vanish, but the dose dulled the sedative bite, softened, and memory sometimes slipped past the chemical gate like a thief. I tasted pepper once, only a ghost of it, and it set the tongue on fire with the idea of flavor. Men who had forgotten how to chew found themselves moving jaws as if relearning a hymn. The infirmary opened its door without a guard's boot. A nurse with a badge instead of a baton pressed cool palms through glove latex, and the antiseptic tang bit the nose the way fear once had. She sutured cuts that would have been left to fester, wrapped ribs that would have been ignored, and spoke in a voice that made the lumen strips hum less cruelly. We learned the ritual of bandage and pill of temperature taken and pulse recorded. And for a moment, the body felt like a patient rather than a problem. Under leaking pipes, they set pots of ferns and ivy, humble things with leaves the color of remembered summers. The plants drank prison water and did not die, and that counted as a miracle. Men paused, guilty and grateful at once, to hold a curled frond between finger and thumb and feel the cool flex of life that was not weapon, not tool, not order. Above the plants on the pitted rockcrete, the photographs waited. Children running through grass, a river fat with light, a farmhouse roof of the color of rust, all printed glossy and oversaturated, as if the machine wanted to convince our eyes that green could exist. I did not believe the images, but my hands believed the paper. Its dry rasp like a page turned in an old book. Classes began with a bell that sounded nothing like an alarm. We lined up clean enough to feel strange uniforms, still coarse but less filthy, and took seats at tables built from scrap boards planed smooth. A stack of primers lay waiting ink, smelling faintly of oil and dust, and pencils had to be signed for and returned like sacred blades. In one corner, a guard watched with his visor lowered and his hands quiet. And in the other, a clerk counted heads and minutes. But the voice at the front belonged to a teacher again, not a foreman. Letters marched across a slate A, as in Astra B, as in Basilica C, as in compliance, and the rhythm of repetition felt like liturgy. We mouthed sounds with ruined mouths and found words still answered when called. Reading is remembering how to be human, said the librarian who taught us, a thin man named Samuel, with a softness that had somehow evaded the millstone of years. His fingers trembled when he touched the margins, not from fear, but from recognition. He guided us across sentences like a ferryman steering a skiff through fog. And when a prisoner stumbled, he did not correct. He waited the way patience waits for a wound to knit. Even numbers came gentler in that room. Sums whispered instead of barked columns, added like steps taken toward a door we were not sure would open. The walks returned, supervised and short, the length of a prayer, down a corridor where the lumen lamps were warmer, where air moved like air instead of engine breath. Boots still tramped, but their cadence shifted from punishment to perimeter. We learned to pace without being chased, to look at a wall without expecting it to hit back. I discovered the heat of a lamp on skin could feel like sunlight if you closed your eyes and lied boldly enough. Breath no longer scraped it, moved. The chest rose and fell without counting toward a quota. Hope arrived as a quiet fog rather than a horn. It crept in the way warmth creeps into fingers in winter, subtle, dangerous. I caught it first in the smell of ink, a clean papery bite that cut through sweat and iron. I caught it again in the soft thock of a page turning, in the whisper of a pencil dragged across fiber, in the murmur of a man sounding out a word and finding it answered. I caught it in the taste of broth that was more than salt and water, in the slick of fat, in the way the stomach stopped clawing for a single hour. I caught it in the lamp that did not interrogate, but radiated. For a heartbeat, I believed a sentence could be survived by learning how to read it. But the Imperium weighs everything that breathes. Its scales are built into the floor. Even grace is rationed. The plants stood only where cameras could see them, and the photographs hung exactly where the eye would land, before the door. The broth measured to the gram, and the pills counted twice. The guards' visors never lifted their lenses, never blinked. When we laughed quietly, they marked the time. When we finished a chapter, they marked the page. And when Samuel said that reading returned pieces of the self, I saw a clerk in the back write the phrase down like a line item to be audited. The mini-climax was not a shout, but a dawning. Fingers warmed by pages, bellies warmed by soup skin, warmed by false sun, hope bloomed anyway, stubborn as weed through concrete. Men who had forgotten their own voices read lines aloud that were not orders. One traced his child's name into the dust on a table and wiped it away with reverence. I looked at a photograph of a river and felt the body, treacherous, lean toward it. For a few days I slept without the clench in the jaw. For a few days the cube felt less like a coffin and more like a room with a door whose outline you could just make out if you squinted. And yet the door was always counted, always guarded, always leased by the hour. The ledger waited with patient teeth. In the Imperium, hope is never free. It is measured, weighed, and eventually withdrawn in the way a hand that stroked a leaf can pluck it without trembling. And somewhere beyond the ferns and the photos and the warm bowls, the next administrator was already sharpening the word efficiency. Reading, Samuel said, is remembering how to be human. And he whispered it, as if the walls might confiscate the syllables, as if words themselves could be stolen the way rations or sleep were stolen. His voice carried the rasp of chalk against slate, worn but steady, and his fingers, always stained with ink, trembled not from fear, but from the effort of carrying something fragile across a room built to break everything. He was not a priest, not a guard, not a foreman. But in the gray monotony of Penitentia Maxima, he became a point of light, faint as a lumen, before it burns out and just as precious. He showed us how to hold paper without crumpling it, how to let a page rest on the palm like it was a bird you did not want to startle. The texture of paper was rough and dry, a rasp that clung to the ridges of calloused fingertips, and the sound of graphite scratching across it was softer than chains, but louder in memory, as if each stroke cut through the paste fog in our heads. We recited letters in broken unison voices, hoarse but steady A, as in Astra B, as in Basilica C, as in compliance. And Samuel nodded as though we had conjured miracles instead of syllables. Each session felt like ritual, a liturgy of sound and silence, paper shuffling pencils, clicking, Samuel's patient murmur, guiding us through the narrow bridge between ignorance and remembrance. And in those rituals, sparks flickered. A man beside me scrawled his child's name with shaking hands and wept into the page until the letters blurred. Another muttered a prayer half-remembered from a world that had long since burned. Someone else whispered a fragment of a poem as though testing if the air could still hold beauty. I found myself tasting the word bread, as if my tongue could summon its crust, smelling rain, as if the syllables themselves had weight. These were dangerous things, more dangerous than knives, because they reminded us that we had been human once. But the Imperium wastes nothing, not even memory. Guards stood in the corners, their visors reflecting every page, their slates recording each sound. Every word spoken was logged as data progress charts, retention metrics, compliance indices. Hope was quantified, its growth measured like crop yield, its decay logged like machine failure. The intimacy of a whispered poem became a statistic. The tremor in a man's voice as he read his daughter's name became a line in a report. The very act that made us human was converted into fuel for the system that sought to strip our humanity away. And still we read, because to stop was to admit the ledger had won. Samuel moved among us with patience that felt almost holy, though it had no altar to rest upon. His back stooped lower each day, his cough scratched deeper, but his hands still guided trembling fingers across the alphabet, as though teaching us was reason enough to stay alive. We did not speak it aloud, but we began to believe survival might be possible if words survived with us. Then came the accusation. Whispers moved faster than any lesson. Samuel had traded an extra ration. Someone said a cup of broth too rich to belong to a prisoner, a kindness miscounted as corruption. The guards made no announcement. They did not drag him before us. They did not strike him down in class. He simply vanished. The next morning, his body lay in the infirmary, pale under lumen glare. His ink-stained fingers folded across his chest like props arranged for a photograph no one would ever see. The classes did not stop. The bell still rang. The primers still waited. Another clerk replaced Samuel's voice with theirs, flat and lifeless, reciting letters without patience, drilling sums without pause. The rhythm continued, but meaning drained out like blood from a wound. We read, but the words no longer opened doors. They closed around us, empty shells. Samuel had said reading was remembering how to be human, but his absence proved the Imperium had learned how to hollow even that. The books remained, but the light was gone. Administrator Vasquez, who had allowed Samuel to teach, was quietly reassigned. No farewells, no explanation, only silence. And in her place came Colonel Thorne. His boots struck stone like the crack of a whip, his visor gleamed, his voice cut the air with a creed of efficiency. He spoke not of service or reform, but of quotas of tournaments of the creed, that usefulness mattered more than hope. Plants withered in their pots, rations shrank again, and the photographs of green fields curled at the edges until they looked more like ash. The season of words ended. The season of numbers returned. The posters of green fields vanished. In their place came ledgers, schedules, and Thorne's voice calling hope a liability. Colonel Thorne was no reformer, no dreamer, no administrator with visions of healing. He was a soldier turned warden, a man who carried efficiency like a creed and wore obedience like armor. Where Vasquez had given us broth with flavor, he gave us gruel thick with chalk. Where she had pinned pictures of forests to rusted walls, he ordered them stripped and burned. Rehabilitation, he said, is waste. Usefulness is service. And service is blood. His voice echoed down, the tears distorted through Vox, every syllable like a chisel taking pieces off the bone. Under Thorne, food was reduced until meals were less than survival, more like calibration. Hunger became a weapon. Those who begged were given less, those who fought were given more. The arena expanded from punishment to entertainment tournaments, held with the cadence of masked guards roaring their approval as men bled in circles of light. Quotas tightened, sleep shortened. The atmosphere thickened with the metallic tang of violence, rehearsed and repeated. For a moment, we remembered Vasquez's green photographs and realized they had not been hope. They had been bait. In the shadow of Thorne's order, resistance smoldered. It never burned openly, it could not, but it whispered, it scratched it, folded itself into corners. Men Men smuggled contraband nails, filed sharp scraps of wire tucked under tongues. Notes were hidden in hollowed books, pressed between pages where poems once lived. We whispered codes in the seams of work songs, tucked signals into coughs, mapped routes in the dust tracked across boots. Every small act felt like striking the Emperor himself, a rebellion of centimeters in a prison built from miles. But the guards were not blind. They did not storm cells with whips and fire. They responded with something colder. Interrogations came, but not as rages. Instead, questions arrived, as if from a doctor's lips spoken softly, steadily, without hatred. Where did you learn that word? Why did you pause before answering? Who taught you to hide the paper? The interrogators spoke with clinical empathy, with concern that was worse than fury. They touched the arm gently as they asked. They leaned forward with care, as though they wanted to save you from yourself. They called it inquiry, but it was vivisection of the soul. Each answer weighed each silence, measured each flicker of fear recorded. Pain was still present, but it came after the slow burn of uncertainty, the gnaw of wondering which word had betrayed you. Fear spread like spores in a damp wall. We learned that visibility was death. To speak too loudly, to volunteer too quickly, to resist too clearly, was to become a subject on someone's slate. The safest rebellion was silence. We began to erase ourselves. We faded into gray routines, performing each gesture with quiet precision, blending into background like dust that no one bothers to sweep. Men who once muttered poems closed their mouths. Those who had hidden tools broke them into scraps and swallowed them with paste. Even glances became dangerous. To look at another man too long was to risk being marked as a link in a chain of suspicion. So we learned invisibility, not by vanishing into shadows, but by standing in the open until no one noticed us at all. The mini-climax came in a choice, sharp as any blade to resist. Visibly was suicide to resist. Invisibly was survival. I chose invisibility. I made myself smaller, quieter. I shaved gestures from my body, clipped syllables from my voice. When guards passed, I kept my eyes forward, but not too firm, my breath steady, but not too slow. I trained myself to be forgettable, and slowly it worked. They looked past me. They read slates and checked quotas, and their boots moved on without pause. My survival became my disappearance. I erased myself with such care that I no longer dreamed of who I had been. Invisibility had become a liturgy, and I recited it perfectly. But the Imperium measures everything, and even absence leaves a trace. The guards began selecting prisoners, not for failure, not for fights, not for visible rebellion, but for something stranger, those who blended too well, those whose silence was too complete. Invisibility, too, was noticed. And when it was noticed, men did not return to the forge works or the arena. They were transferred deeper, past the cells, past the labor blocks, past even the pits. Deeper, where reform and cruelty no longer opposed each other, but merged into something colder: research. They called it the research wing. Larger cells, brighter lights, the illusion of comfort, but the air stank of antiseptic and steel. The moment we were moved, we knew this was not mercy. It was measurement. The cells were wider, high enough that you could stretch without touching both walls. Each came with a small window that looked not onto sky or fields, but onto cavern walls, black rock, sweating water in endless trickles. The food was better, thicker paste, even bread that cracked between the teeth, but every meal tasted of suspicion. The comfort was never gift. It was lure designed to see how we reacted when the leash loosened by a notch. Observation was constant. Guards here did not shout. They hardly spoke at all. The ones who filled the air were the doctors. Their coats were white but stiff with starch, and their pens clicking like weapons. They asked questions not of guilt, but of thought. What did you feel when he cried? Why did you hesitate before lifting the tool? Would you stop him if he broke procedure? Wires sprouted from our skulls, electrodes pressing against skin, cold gel seeping into hair. The machines hummed like insects. Screens flickered as lines rose and fell, mapping thought as if it were no more sacred than breath. A scanner followed eye movements, recording every flinch, every glance toward another prisoner. Our hesitations were catalogued, our impulses were filed. Pain was still present, but more clinical shocks measured by voltage, not rage. Needles slipped in and out with steady rhythm stimulants, to heighten fear sedatives, to dull anger. We were not punished here. We were studied. And standing among the rows of clipboards was Dr. Helena Cross. She was young compared to the wardens, her voice calm, her eyes without pity or malice. She spoke of us as if we were equations, internalized institutional goals, she called it. Her lectures came as we sat strapped in chairs, heads wired, muscles trembling under faint currents. You are learning to align survival instinct with obedience. You no longer resist orders because you know resistance wastes energy. You no longer trust because trust disrupts efficiency. You self-regulate. You police each other. That is the mark of progress. Her words were smooth as glass, sharp as blades hidden beneath. We listened because we could not close our ears. We obeyed because the tests demanded it. The mini-climax came without warning. During one session, a man beside me faltered his hands, trembling as he reached for the correct response tile. I should have looked away. Months ago, I would have shielded him. But something inside me moved first, my voice cutting through, correct it. The doctors did not need to command. I had done it for them. The man adjusted, eyes lowered, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction. It was brief, hollow, but real. I realized I was no longer resisting. I was correcting. I was spreading their compliance like infection, disciplining others without thinking. My empathy was gone, rerouted into survival logic. My memories dulled like worn coins. In that moment, I understood I had become their instrument. Dr. Cross only nodded, recording my response with a small smile that was neither cruel nor kind. You are the template, she said. Proof that systems can refine flesh into order. Proof that a man can become a doctrine. Her voice rang louder than the machines, heavier than the steel around us. Success, she called it. And in that success, I saw my own erasure complete. Not rebellion, not survival, only function. A human instrument tuned to a single note obedience.